okay, X-bar theory. We need X-bar theory to generate only grammatical sentences. Why? Because there is nothing in X-bar theory that restrict the number of arguments required by the verb. Okay, so let's start with some basic terminology. The arguments that a verb takes. So before talking about this is something that you already know. For example, an intransitive verb requires only the subject. For example, John smiled. So the verb smile is an intransitive verb. So it requires only the subject, which is a DP. Transitive verbs, monotransitive verbs, require two arguments, the subject and the object. The subject must be a DP, which is in P, must be a DP, and the object must be a DP. And ditransitive verbs, as you know, they require, okay, two arguments, mono or di, okay. They require three arguments in this case if we're talking about the verb give, okay, give, make, etc. So, for example, I gave him a book. So this verb requires three arguments. Okay, this is what we are going to talk about. So this is something that you should know. You should know the nature of the verb. You should know the number of the arguments that are required. Okay, the number of the arguments required by the verb. Okay, so for example, an intransitive verb such as leave, okay, requires only one argument. Look at the dash here. It's preceded by DP. DP, which means this verb requires only DP, which is the subject. Only one argument. Okay, so this is intransitive. It requires only one argument. And we also have transitive verbs, but there are transitive verbs of type 1 and type 2. Type 1, such as the verb hit, it requires two arguments, the subject as a DP and the object as a DP. For example, okay, I hit him, which means that I is a DP and it's the subject, and him is an object and it's a DP. And the second type of transitive verbs, they require a DP or CP. So type 1 and type 2 are similar, except that sometimes you have in the object DP and sometimes you have CP, which means that transitive verbs of type 2, they may take a DP as an object or a CP. For example, the verb ask. You may say, I asked some questions. So here you have the subject is DP and the object is a DP. Or you may say, I asked if, etc. I asked if we can postpone the meeting, which means here the object is a CP, the complementizer phrase. But verbs of type 1 always take a DP as a complement. Okay? So transitive verbs type 1 and type 2 are similar in terms of the number of the arguments required, except that type 1 always requires a DP as an object, and type 2 verbs require either a DP or CP. Now, ditransitive, again, verbs are of two types, type 1 and type 2. So ditransitive verbs type 1, such as spare, such as assign, they require the subject, which is the DP, and two objects, and they must be DPs. For example, they spared him embarrassment. They assigned him a task. So they is the subject, assign is the verb, it's here. They assigned him the first DP. A task is the second DP. Okay, so it's the ditransitive. Okay, or the verb give, but it's not of this type. So look, we have four types of ditransitive verbs. We have four types. We have verbs like spare, assign, etc. They must have two objects, and these two objects must be two DPs. For example, they assigned him a task. So him is the first object, it's a DP, and a task is the second object, and it's a DP. Okay, and ditransitive type 2 verbs, they require the subject is the DP, and the object, the first object must be a DP, and the second one must be a PP. Okay, so for example, I put the book on the table. So I is the first argument, it's the subject, and put is the verb here. DP, I put the book. The book is the first object, DP. On the table is a preposition phrase. You can never find the verb put with two objects and both objects are DPs. For example, we cannot say, I put the book the table. I put the book the table. Okay, and ditransitive type 3, like give, they require the subject DP. They require the object to be DP and either another DP or a preposition phrase. Either another DP or a preposition phrase. For example, you can say, I gave him a book. Here you have two DPs. I gave him a book. In this case, it's similar to ditransitive type 1. Or you can say, I gave a book to him. I gave a book to him. So the two possibilities. Okay? And finally, ditransitive type 4, the verb tell. Tell. Tell is different from ask. How? Because the verb tell requires the object to be a DP and another object to be a DP or a preposition phrase or a complementizer phrase. For example, I told him, so him is the first object, it's a DP, and you can add another DP. For example, I told him the truth, another DP, or I told him about the truth, so, or a preposition phrase, or I told him that, okay, he should have accepted the job. You see? So these are the types of verbs that we are going to deal with. So first, you should understand that intransitive verbs require only the subject, only one argument. Okay? Transitive verbs, there are two types. They are similar. They are similar in terms of the number of the arguments required. Okay? The transitive verbs of type 1 and of type 2 require only two arguments, the subject and the object. Okay? The only difference is that type 2 transitive verbs require either a DP, the second argument, which is the object, can be either a DP or a CP. Okay? And the same thing for ditransitive verbs. Ditransitive verbs require all of them require three arguments. The subject, as you can see here, the subject is always a DP. Or, and the first, okay? The first, look at ditransitive verbs. The first one is a DP, and the third, so the second argument is a DP, and the third argument could be a DP or a preposition phrase or a CP. It depends on the verb you are dealing with. Is it clear? So please remember that intransitive verbs take only one argument, the subject. Transitive verbs take two arguments. Ditransitive verbs take three arguments. And you have to bear in mind that, for example, if you have verbs like tell, the third argument must be either a DP, PP, or CP, because you may have in the exam a question like this. For example, I give you like, look at the verb put. Suppose that in the exam you have, I put the book the table. Why is it incorrect? I put the book the table. Of course, we have three arguments. We have I, which is the DP, and the book is DP is the second argument, and the table is the third argument. So the verb has three arguments. So what is the problem? Okay, so what is the problem? We have the verb put requires three arguments, and we have three arguments. We have I put the book, the table. So the problem, and please remember this, the problem is that the third argument must be a prepositional phrase, not a DP. So the book, I put the book, the table, we have three arguments. The problem is not in the number of the arguments. The problem is in the nature of the arguments. The third argument must be a prepositional phrase, not another DP. So please pay attention to the nature of the arguments, not only the number of the arguments. Another example, think of the verb ask. So we said the verb ask may take as its object a DP or a CP. We may say I asked a question, or I asked if we can leave, etc., or if we could leave earlier. So ask must have an object argument, either as a DP or a CP. But if I give you a sentence like I asked about, okay, things, or about whatever. So remember, the object must be a DP or a CP. If the object is a preposition phrase, okay, a preposition phrase or an adverb, etc. So you should say that although we have two arguments, but the object argument, okay, is not the correct argument required by the verb. The verb requires either a DP or a CP. Is it clear? Is there any question?
Yes, sir.
It's clear, Professor.
Okay. Now, in addition to these restrictions, we also find semantic restrictions on what can appear in particular positions. Now, look at these examples. My comb hates raisins. The bolt of lightning killed the rock. I think you're aware of the problem here. Can anyone explain why these sentences are not accepted? Think of the meaning as semantic restriction. Yes, please.
Professor, those group of words do not convey meaning.
Okay, so yes, Mr. Okay. Yes. Yes, okay, go ahead, Mr. Smith.
Yes, the noun, the subject comp, does not have the ability to hate. It's minus animate.
Good. And the second example. Yes, yes, Ms. Khadija.
In the second example, approximately the same. Because when we look at the rock, it's something that cannot be killed because it's not alive.
Exactly. Okay. So here, the comb cannot hate, does not have the ability to hate. Okay. Hate is a human property. Okay. So the rock cannot be killed. Cannot be killed. Okay. So the problem here is that the verb hate, we know that it requires two arguments: a subject, DP, and an object, DP. Indeed, it has two arguments. It has two arguments: the subject, by comb, and the object. So what is the problem? The problem is in semantic restrictions. The problem is in the meaning, semantics. The comb cannot hate. In B again, the verb kill, we already know that it requires two arguments. Somebody killed something. So it requires two arguments. Okay? So it requires two arguments, the subject and the object. We have two arguments in B. A bolt of lightning killed a rock. So we have two arguments. Okay? A bolt of lightning as the subject and a rock as the object. So the problem here is not in the number of the arguments, because the verbs here in A and B have exactly the same number, okay, of the arguments that they require. Hate and kill require two arguments. They have two arguments. So the problem is not in the number of the arguments. The number is that the problem is in semantic restriction. So, which means that the subject, like comb, cannot hate, and the rock cannot be killed. This means that in addition to the restrictions on the number of the arguments required by the verb, we have to add semantic restrictions. You got the point? So, okay, restricting only the number of the arguments that are required by the verb, that's not enough. Okay, we need to restrict the nature of the argument required by the verb. So cones not hate anything and rocks not be killed. So these semantic criteria are called selectional restriction, which means that the verb hate is not select whom, because whom is not characterized by this feeling. Okay, there is some kind of selection restriction. So remember these two ideas, please. We have to restrict the number of the arguments required by the verb. If the verb requires 2 arguments, there must be 2 arguments, etc. And also semantic restrictions. Okay. So thematic relations and theta roles. So to encode selectional restrictions, we use thematic relations. Okay. Now we are going to talk about selectional restrictions, those semantic restrictions, but we use thematic relations. So thematic relations, these are particular semantic terms used to describe the role that the argument plays with respect to the predicate. Okay? The thematic relations are semantic terms that are used to describe the role, okay, of the argument. For example, what is the role of the subject argument? What is the role? Is it an agent? Is it an actor? Is it, okay, a team? Is it the one that initiates the action, etc.? So, okay, so thematic relation about the semantic verb, okay, that describe the role of the argument with respect to the predicate. Some common thematic relations are, so we'll talk about the most, okay, common thematic relations. So we have the agent, the initiator or doer of an action, the one that does the action. Okay, it could be plus or minus human. Okay. Forget about those thematic relations that you talked about in semantics, because there are some differences. Okay, in semantics, for example, you may find a difference between an agent and an actor. We're not going to talk about that in syntax. Affected, etc. We're not going to talk about that because it's slightly different, okay, from syntax. So the agent is the initiator or the doer of an action, okay, the one that does the action. Ryan, for example, hit and draw. Ryan is the agent. Okay, Michael accidentally broke the glass. Michael is the agent. Look at the sentence, accidentally broke, which means that the agent does not necessarily okay, do the action accidentally or intentionally. Okay, so the agent may intentionally, okay, do the action as in A, or accidentally do the action as in B. So in the 2 cases, okay, it's an agent. So agents are most frequently subjects, but they can also appear in other positions. For example, in passive voice, we say, so Andrew was hit by Ryan. So Ryan is the agent, but it's not in the subject position. Okay, so the first thematic relation is the agent. The second one is the experiencer, somebody who experiences something. So experiences are arguments that feel or perceive events. So experiencers can appear in a number of argument positions, including subjects and objects. For example, Lee likes cookies. This is a feeling, likes. So, which means that it's the nature of the verb that determines whether the subject is an experiencer, is an agent, etc. B, Lorenzo saw. So the action of okay, looking, and okay, the eclipse. Lorenzo is an experiencer. Syntax frightens Kenny. So Kenny feels frightened. Okay, this is also a feeling. So when we have feelings or perception, so then the NP, that subject, or okay, should be an experiencer. It could be a subject or an object. For example, in C, it's an object. Syntax frightens Kenny. Okay, so experiencers are found with verbs that express perception, such as with verbs like see, perceive, hear, taste, feel, smell, etc. Or subjects and objects of verbs of emotion, such as frighten, fear, dishearten, etc. Or verbs of cognition, know, understand, etc. Okay, so the NPs that are found with these verbs are called, okay, experiencers. There is a temptation among neosyntacticians to extend the notion experiences to all sorts of arguments, which means it doesn't have to be a human being. Okay, and you think that experiences something is an experiencer. Okay, so consider these examples, the Rockville on Terry. So Terry is an experiencer because it feels something. The car hit the wall. This is what he said. Okay, the wall is not a human being, so the wall cannot really feel. Okay, cannot really feel this act of being hit. But there is a tendency towards generalizing the term experiencer to human beings and not human beings as well. Okay, and this is what we are adopting as well. Okay, whenever there is some kind of feeling, perception, whether it's a human being or not a human being, we give it the term experiencer. Okay, number 3, the theme. So we have covered the agent, somebody who does the action, and the experiencer, somebody or something that feels or perceives something. And number 3 is the theme. The theme, okay, means entities, things that undergo actions or are moved, experienced, or perceived. Pay attention to the passive voice here. Are moved, are experienced, or perceived. This is different from the experiencer. Experiences is that person or that thing that experiences something or that perceives. And the thing which is experienced or which is perceived or which is moved, etc., is called the theme. The one that undergoes some action. Okay, so this is called the theme. Lisa kept her syntax book. Okay, most of the time you find objects as themes, Okay, so her syntax book is the thing which is which was kept. Okay, so this is a theme. Her syntax book, it's a theme. The arrow hit Ben. Okay, so Ben is a theme. And the syntactician hates phonology. Okay, hates phonology. Phonology is the thing which is hated. In B, Ben is the person, okay, that is hit. Okay, so the theme is the thing that undergoes a certain action. Maybe he's moved, maybe he's experienced, maybe he's perceived, maybe he's killed, etc., etc. There are many objects that are themes, but you may find fewer objects that are experiencers, etc. So most of the time as objects, you find themes. Okay?
Professor,
Yes?
if you think about it, for example, the arrow hits Ben. Ben is the thing, and he also feels something, so it is also the experience.
Yeah. So yes, you're right. We'll talk about this point. Okay, sometimes you may have more than one thematic relation. Okay, sometimes an NP, a DP, okay, a noun can be the agent and experiencer. Sometimes it can be a theme and an experiencer, etc. Okay? Yes, we will have examples to explain this point. For example, B, the arrow hit Ben. So Ben is the theme and also an experiencer because it feels this action, okay, of being hit. Number 4, the goal. Okay, the goal is very clear, the entity towards which motion takes place. Okay, goals may involve abstract motion as well. Example, Doug went to Chicago. Chicago is the place, is the goal. I think in semantics we are calling it place. Okay, here we call it goal, to Chicago. Dave was given the senior to learn next. So Dave is the goal. Dave was given. This is the goal. The entity towards which motion takes place. The entity towards the action takes place. Okay? For example, I gave John a book. So this action starts from me. Okay? I is the person, I'm the person who gave the book. So I gave John a book. So the action ended, okay, with John, because John is the one, is the goal. Okay, I initiated the action. It ended with John. Okay, I gave John. So Dave was given. So Dave is the goal. An evil thought struck Dave. Dave is the goal. Okay, so the goal doesn't have to be a place. Okay, it could be people as well. We'll see that again. A goal or recipient. Both of them for Dave. Goal is like the direction of the action. It goes towards a specific person or location. Number 5, recipient, the person who receives an action. It's similar to the goal. That's why I said it could be the goal or recipient in certain contexts. So it's a special kind of goal, a special kind of goal. Recipients only occur with verbs that denote a change of position. So the goal is the general term. Within goal, we have recipient. It's a special kind of goal. Okay, goal shows, okay, the direction of the action. The one that receives the action is the goal. Recipient is a kind of a goal, but it occurs only with verbs that denote a change of position. Okay, here are some examples. Okay, Ella gave Jessica the verb. So here with verbs gave and received, we have recipient. Okay, so gave Jessica. Jessica received something. Okay? So the verbs, so recipients occur with verbs that denote a change of possession. Okay, gave. So something that belongs to Michaela, okay, was given to Jessica. This is the meaning of a change of possession. Daniel received a scolding from Hannah. So change of possession. Okay, so here we're talking about recipient. Now look at the verb give. This is what we are going to do. We're going to talk about the number. We already said that the verb give requires 3 arguments, okay, the subjects and 2 objects. But what kind of arguments? So it requires the subject, which is the agent, and it requires the indirect object, Jessica, for example, which is the recipient, and it requires the direct object, the book, which is what? Can anyone answer, please? What is the book here? Akila gave Jessica the book. Very good. It's a theme. So please remember, the verb give requires. This is like the conclusion. You have to remember that. You have to remember the number of the arguments that a verb requires and the nature of these arguments. For example, the verb give requires 3 arguments: the subject, DP, which must be an agent or the source, as we will say. Okay, and requires an indirect object, which must be recipient, and it requires the 3rd argument, direct object, which is a theme. Okay, so if I give you, for example, in the exam, Michael gave the book the money. The book, the money. So what should you say? Okay, very simple. You should say that the verb
Naturally.
give. the verb give requires 3 arguments, and we have 3 arguments. Okay, so the problem is not in the number of the arguments required by the verb. The problem is in the thematic relations. Okay, in the okay theta roles that we have. The theta roles that we have. For example, the verb give requires the subject's argument to be an agent, and Michaela is an agent. Fine. It requires the indirect object to be the recipient. This is the problem. I said Michaela gave the book the money. So this is what you should say. The problem is that the verb give requires the first object or the first complement to be a recipient, somebody who receives something. But here we have 2 themes. Michaela gave the book John, or gave the book the money. The problem is that we have 2 themes. We have 2 themes, and the verb give does not require 2 themes. It requires 1 theme, 1 recipient, and 1 agent. So you may have something similar to this in the exam. Okay, you may have, the problem in the number of the arguments. Maybe I ask you, why is this sentence incorrect? John gave the money. John gave the money. Can anyone explain the problem here, please? John gave the money. Okay, Karima, yes, please.
The verb give required 3 arguments. In this sentence, the problem in the number. John gave the money. We need a DP or a PP to him, or what?
So what is missing here? John gave the money. What is missing? Which argument is missing?
Professor?
If you know the answer, just raise your hands.
Receiver.
Raise your hand. So just raise your hand. Okay. Mohammed Arwi, yes? John gave the money.
We need the prepositional.
We need the recipient, right?
Recipient.
We need the recipient. Okay. So we have the agent and we have the theme. We have the agent and we have the theme, but we need the recipient. Fine. And for the sentence, John gave the book the money. The problem is that we have 2 themes, but the verb give does not require 2 themes. Okay. The same thing, okay, we said about the other verbs like ask, tell, etc. If I say, for example, I told, for example, I told, and we stop. I told, and we stop. It's incorrect. Why? Because the verb tell requires 3 arguments. I told him the truth, for example. I told him the truth. Okay? I told him. So in this case, him is a goal, and the truth is a theme. Okay? And I is the agent. Okay? So let's continue. Now we move on to the source. It's the opposite of a goal. Okay, the source. We have the source and we have the goal. This is the entity from which an action, a motion originates. Okay, for example, when I say Bob gave Steph. So Steph is the goal, or is the recipient. So Bob is the source. So the source is the entity from which the action, the motion starts. Bob is the one that starts the action. So again here, Bob is both. Bob is both a source and an agent. Okay? B, Stacy came directly from sociolinguistics class. Okay, so from sociolinguistics class, this is the source. She came from that place, from that source, from sociolinguistics class. This is the source. So, okay, so the source is the entity from which a motion originates, from which an action starts. Okay, number 7, location is the place. Location, the place where the action occurs. Okay, the place where the action occurs. For example, Andrew is in Tuckson's finest apartment. This is a place. We're all at school, so at school is a location. Okay. Remember, so as not to be confused, we talked about the binding theory. Binding theory. we talked only about noun phrases. But here, we're not simply talking about noun phrases. Okay? So in the thematic relations, theta roles, so we do not talk simply about noun phrases. But in the binding theory, okay, only noun phrases are considered. The instrument, so location is the place where the action occurs. Instrument is indeed the instrument, okay, by which an action is performed. So the object with which an action is performed. For example, Weiss hacked the computer apart with an axe. With an axe is the instrument used, okay, to hack the computer apart. This key will open the door to the linguistics building. So this key is the tool, is the instrument that will open the door. Okay, so the instrument is very easy, is the object that is used, okay, to perform a certain action. Beneficiary, this kind of thematic relation, we have it when we have verbs that require for. I think you're familiar with benefactive objects. Okay, we have indirect objects and benefactive object. Benefactive object is similar to indirect object, except that with benefactive object we use for. Okay, so the one for whose benefit an event took place, the one that benefits from an action. It's similar to recipient, very similar, okay, to recipient, but with beneficiary we have for. For example, he bought these flowers for Aaron. She cooked Matt dinner. She cooked Matt. So here for Aaron, or simply Aaron, so is beneficiary. Is called beneficiary. She cooked Matt dinner. Matt is beneficiary. Why? Because we can say she cooked dinner for Matt. Okay, she cooked dinner for Matt. This is the difference between benefactive object, here we have beneficiary, and indirect object. There are other differences, such as indirect object has two passive voice possibilities, and benefactive object has only one possibility of the passive voice. Okay, and we have for here. It's recipient, yes, but specifically it's beneficiary because here we have for. Okay, so just to recap, so number one is the agent, somebody who does the action. Number two is the experiencer, somebody who experiences something. Number three is a theme, okay, the thing that undergoes the action. The goal, okay, the end of certain action is directed to, okay, that's the goal. And we have the recipient, somebody who receives the action, okay, and we have the source, okay, the start, okay, of the action. It's the thing or the object or the entity from which an action originates or starts. And we have location is simply the place where the action occurs. Instrument is simply the object, okay, with which an action is performed. And we have beneficiary, the one that benefits from an action. Its difference, okay, from recipient is that beneficiary we have for. Is it clear now? So these are the most common thematic relations we are going to focus on. Is there any question about these thematic relations? They are called thematic relations. Thematic relations, okay?
So,
yes.
is there any relation to time? Because we spoke about location, where, but not about time, when.
Time, not necessarily here, okay? You know why? Because what is the function? What is the syntactic function, Mr. Yasir, of clauses or phrases that denote time? For example, yesterday, for example, at noon, tomorrow, etc. What is the syntactic function of these phrases, Mr. Yasir?
They tell of a of a certain days.
Yes, but what is the syntactic function?
Name
Adverse
adverbial verbs.
Adverbials. So yeah, so you can say adjuncts or adverbials, okay?
Yes, Professor.
Adjuncts or adverbials. Now, you should understand, Mr. Yasir, you should understand why, the reason why we are talking about these thematic relations, because we want to restrict the number of the arguments required by the verb and the nature of these arguments. But the adjuncts are not arguments, Mr. Yasir. The adjuncts are not arguments. Okay, for example, we cannot say, especially those of time, we cannot say that the verb must take an adjunct. So this is contradiction. Remember what we talked about before. Okay, here, do we have any? Look at this diagram here. Do we have anything that says that the time here, an adverb or an adjunct, which is obligatory? So these preposition phrases that we have here are not functioning as adjuncts. For example, I put the book on the table. Why I'm saying this? Because usually preposition phrases function as adjuncts. Okay, so here they are required by the verb. For example, on the table, I put the book on the table. On the table is not an adjunct; it's a complement. So you have to be clever enough. We are talking about the arguments required by the verb, which means that we're not going to talk about adverbs, adjuncts, okay, such as adverbs of time, etc., because they can never be arguments. They can never be obligatorily required by a verb. So why should we talk about them? You got the point, Mr. Yasir? We're not talking about adverbs of time, etc., because they will never be required by a verb. They can never be a theme or a recipient or a source or whatever. So we simply ignore them.
And since they are not required by the verb, they have no effect on restricting the verb. I understand, so thank you.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Okay, so notice that.
Sir?
Any other question, Karima? Yes?
Yeah, excuse me. In the exam, how we can distinction between source and agents? As we saw here, that they are similar. Ryan, Heath, Andrew. It's called the source of the action. No.
It's
How?
both. It's
Yeah.
the source and agent. It's the
Yeah.
source and agent. Okay,
In the
both of
exam,
them.
we mentioned both. We
Both
said
of them.
and okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, and this is the point we are going to cover indeed. So notice that any given DP can have more than one thematic relation. Okay. So for example, the DP JSON bears the thematic relations of agent and source. This is like an answer to your question, Ms. Karima. So Jason gave the books to Anna. So Jason is both. Is an agent because it's the one that does the action, and it's the source of the action. Okay. So there is no one-to-one relationship between thematic relations and arguments. So this is one argument. Jason is one argument. It's the subject. We said the verb give requires three arguments. Requires the first argument is the subject, Jason. So Jason is the first argument, is one argument. But it has two thematic relations. It's an agent and it's a source. Is this idea clear? Because it's very interesting. You have one argument, which is the subject, Jason, one argument, but two thematic relations. It's an agent and a source. So we conclude that there is no one-to-one relationship between thematic relations and arguments. Okay, Jason is one argument, but it has two thematic relations. Okay, it's an agent and a source. Is this point clear?
Yes, Professor.
Yes.
So linguists have a special construct called a theta role that does map one-to-one with argument. So please, this is what we are going to focus on. Now we have explained the number of the arguments required by a verb. We have explained the nature of the arguments required by a verb. Now we move to something very interesting, which is here I said there is one argument, but two thematic relations, which means we are going to focus on this mapping relationship between the arguments and the thematic relations. Okay, and we are going to use theta rho. Okay, theta role is the one that maps this one-to-one correspondence, okay, between arguments and thematic relations. So theta roles are bundles of thematic relations. So theta roles refers to this group, to this bundle of thematic relations that cluster on one argument. Cluster, for example, look at the sentence, Jason gave the books to Anna. So how many arguments does the verb give take? 3. The first one is the subject. The first one is the subject. This is the first argument. How many thematic relations it has? It has 2 thematic relations, Jason. So we have one argument, but we have 2 thematic relations. We have it has agent, it can be called agent or source. So these agent and source are called theta roles. Theta roles. So theta roles refer to those bundles, those set of thematic relations that cluster on a certain argument. Here, for example, the books. The books is the object. It's a theme. It's a theme. It's the thing that is given. Okay, so it's a theme. So we have one argument, okay, which is the theme, which is the books is the argument. So this is another argument. It has one thematic relation, which is the theme. To Anna, this is the third argument that is required by the verb give. How many thematic relations? So to Anna, we may say it's the goal and it's the recipient. Okay, so it has two thematic relations if you want. So okay, so please remember this distinction between the argument and the thematic relations. For example, Jason is one argument. It has 2 thematic relations, agent and source. These thematic relations are called theta roles. The books is the second argument required by the verb give. It has one thematic relation, which is theme. To Anna is the third argument required by the verb give. It has 2 thematic relations. It can be the recipient, it can be the goal if you want. Okay, so these thematic relations are called theta roles. Is it clear? Because you must distinguish between argument, thematic relations, and theta roles. Please, this is very interesting. Arguments are clear. It refers to the number of the arguments required by the verb, object, etc. And thematic relations, agent, source, recipient, beneficiary, goal, etc. And theta roles refers to these thematic relations. Any question? Is it clear?
Yes, Professor.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So in the example,
Professor,
yes,
can we have 2 direct objects, for example, gave the book and the pencil?
we can say, can we have 2 direct objects with the verb give? It's impossible. The verb give must have an indirect object, must have a recipient. We can say, for example, Jason gave John the book. So John is the recipient. John is the recipient. With the verb give, there must be a recipient. With other verbs, such as so it depends on the nature of the verb. There are verb give requires as the object requires a recipient and a theme. The verb, for example, some verbs require a theme and an instrument. For example, we may say he killed him with a knife. He killed, or you can simply say he killed him, or he killed him with a knife. So with a knife is an instrument, no problem. Okay? Or you can, as we will see with certain verbs, you may have 2 themes. For example, I told him the truth. So him could be the goal, okay? I told the truth to him, or could be the recipient. Okay? I told him, the one that receives the truth. Okay? It could be the goal. Okay? I told him the truth. So the truth is the theme. So there are verbs that require 2 themes. Okay? 2 themes. But if you use and, So if you use and, it's one theme. For example, I gave him books and money. So books and I gave him books and money. So books and money, it's only one argument. Okay. We go back to the verbs that we started with. So you will see, yes, such as assign or spare. Okay, ditransitive type 1, okay, require two themes, two DPs, two themes could be, okay, for example, or not necessarily two themes. It could be, him is not a theme here, okay, they spared him the embarrassment. I assigned him a task, okay, I assigned him a task, so him is a goal indeed. I don't know, maybe there might be some exceptions where we have two themes, although it sounds impossible.
Sir,
Yeah, it could be if you think of it, if you find an exceptional case, it's probable. I'm not sure yet, but we just need to take some time to think of some examples. Yes, yes, Karima?
it could be included in CP when we have CP conjunct CP. The answer about this question, the solution in can you go back to the transitive type 2 or in ditransitive type 4? We can include this sentence here when we have CP and branch it as CP conjunct CP.
I don't know. For example, we may say, I asked him that, etc. So him is not a theme. Okay, him is not a theme. Okay, I asked some people, etc. I asked some questions. Yeah, I asked some questions. So some questions is a theme. But we cannot say I asked some questions that, etc. But we can say I asked him that, etc. So when you use a theme, you are blocked. When you say I asked some questions, I asked some people, okay, or I asked some people that, etc. So here, that, etc. is not, okay, that does not get a thematic relation. Anyhow, it sounds, well, to themes, I don't know, maybe it's impossible because we cannot say I asked the money or I asked the people, the students. You must use and. In that case, it becomes only one theme. Okay? We cannot say, for example, I want some money, some books. We cannot say that the verb want requires two themes. In this case, the money and the books. Okay? So you see, I'm still thinking of it, but I don't think it's possible for a verb to obligatory requires two themes. I don't think it's possible. If you find any counterexample, please bring it to me. Right, so we move on. We're talking about the point here, which is that mapping relationship between the argument and the number of the thematic relations. So please remember the arguments are clear here. 3 arguments with the verb give, and thematic relations refer to those theta rows, okay, refer to those thematic relations that cluster on one argument. So we have one argument, and it can have one or more, okay, than one argument, the thematic relation. In the example above, Jason gets 2 thematic relations, agent and source, but only one theta row, because theta row refers to the number of thematic relations. You may have 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., but it is called only one theta row. Okay, only one theta row, the one that contains the agent and source thematic relations. Okay. So remember, thematic relations are things like agent, theme, goal, etc. But theta rows are bundles. Bundle means groups or set of bundles of thematic relations assigned to a particular argument. Okay? Let's now see how we can use these theta rows to represent the argument structure of a verb. Okay, we take the verb place as an example of a ditransitive verb. Ditransitive. Now let me ask you, how many arguments are required by the verb place, and what kind of arguments? Yes, please raise your hand if you want to answer. Think of sentences. We say place something like that. Please raise your hand if you know the answer. Okay, Latifa, yes, it's Latifa.
Professor, we can say I place the book on the table. So the verb place requires three arguments, which are subjects and the direct object, which is the theme, and on the table, a preposition phrase.
So what is the thematic relation of this argument preposition phrase?
I think location.
On the table. Place or location. Okay, good. So place, the verb place requires three arguments. Okay. It requires three arguments. A subject that must be an agent, the placer, somebody who plays something. Okay, so it requires the agent. And a direct object which represents the theme. Placed the book is the theme. The thing being placed, the thing that undergoes the action. And requires an indirect object which represents a location or goal, the thing on which the theme is being placed, and must be a preposition phrase. You must know this, okay, information about any verb you are dealing with. If I give you any verb, you should know the number of the arguments required, whether one argument, two arguments, three arguments, okay? So at the maximum, three arguments. And you should know what kind of thematic relations required by any verb. Let me give you another example. The verb sleep. How many arguments and thematic relations required by this verb? Can anyone answer, please? Raise your hand. Yes, Miss Naima? Mr. Omar?
It could be act as an intransitive verb. Requires one argument. For example, I slept.
So one argument and thematic relations?
Agent is the doer of the action.
Yes, agent. Yes, so the verb sleep requires one argument, which is the subject, with one thematic relation, one theta role, which is, the agent. Yes, another example.
So,
yes, Mr. Yasir?
It can also have two arguments. The subject and the other one is the place where they slept. For example, I slept on the bed.
Yes, I have to say it to you again. Okay, adjuncts, okay, are not included in the number of the arguments required by the verb. The preposition phrase here on a bed is not obligatory to the verb sleep. Adjuncts are optional, so they are not counted as arguments. They're not required by the verb. You can simply say she slept. You don't need that preposition phrase. Please pay attention. Adjuncts are not included in the number of the arguments. We can, for example, say escape, for example. She escaped early. She escaped early. So don't say that early is an adverb, so it's required by the verb. No. Okay? So we're talking only about obligatory arguments. Okay? Adjuncts are not included in the number of the arguments. Maybe what you are saying is true when talking about the verb smoke, for example. We say, he smokes full stop. He is somebody who smokes in his life. So here the verb is intransitive. Okay, so it requires only the agent. Okay, an agent, somebody who does the action. Fine. But if we say he smokes 5 cigarettes a day, in this case, yes, the object is required. Okay, so in this case, it requires an agent, somebody who smokes, and the thing that is smoked, okay, which is 5 cigarettes. So in this case, yes, the verb smoke requires the agent and a theme, which is 5 cigarettes. But this is not the same thing, because here we have an NP, a DP, which is required by the verb smoke. But he smokes 5 cigarettes every day. This every day functions as an adjunct. It's not required. Okay? Or 5 cigarettes every night, or at night, at noon, in the morning, etc. We don't need this information. So please do not make this mistake. Do not include adjuncts as arguments, because they are optional. So they're not required by the verb. So they're not considered as arguments. So they can never have thematic relations. Is it clear? Any question about this?
Yes, sir. Understood. Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, we move on. This is an example of, we took the example of the verb place and the verb give and the verb smoke, okay, and the verb sleep and the verb escape, etc. So these are, okay, maybe one more example, maybe. The verb challenge. How many arguments are required by this verb? The verb challenge. Only 2 arguments.
2 arguments, yeah.
Yeah, for example, he challenged me. He challenged me. Okay, so he challenged, he is the agent, okay, and me challenged me. Me, the person that is challenged, okay, that undergoes the action, could be a theme. Okay, so any variation from this results in ngrammaticality. If the verb, for example, place requires 3 arguments and you find only 2 arguments, so this is ungrammatical. Okay, so pay attention to these sentences. This is a good example to have an idea about the exam. If you have this in the exam, it should be something like this. For example, the verb place. Only A here is correct. Why? Because the verb place requires 3 arguments. Requires an agent, and requires a theme, which is the flute, and requires a goal or location, which is on the table. This is the reason why A is correct, because the verb place requires 3 arguments. We have 3 arguments. But these 3 arguments, they must be, the subject must be an agent, and the 2 complements, the first one must be theme, and the second one must be location or goal. And this is what we have indeed. This is the reason why this sentence is correct. But what about B? What is missing? Can you please account for the ungrammaticality of this sentence? This is the question, how it's going to be in the exam. Okay?
Agents.
How would you?
Agent.
Please raise your hands, please. Raise your hands, because I'm taking screenshots for, those who participate. So, if you know the answer, raise your hand. I'm going to ask you. Yes, Amin Al-Wafi, please.
We have the absence of the agent in the second sentence.
Yes, so the verb place, okay, misses or lacks the agent. Okay, the agent, thematic relation. Okay, the argument, the subject, or the agent thematic relation. Okay, C, John placed on the table. Okay, it's missing what? Please raise your hands, please. Mr. Zuhair, yes, can you hear?
We need theme.
We need the theme, okay? The theme is missing, right? Good. D, please, John plays the flute. What is missing in D? In D, John plays the flute. Muhammad al-Bariri? Yes, please. Muhammad al-Bariri? Muhammad.
We miss the location.
Okay, yes, good. E, so the verb lacks the location on the goal, which is on the table. Now, E, John plays the flute, the violin on the table. On the table, okay? So what's the problem here? Why is it ungrammatical? Please, if you know the answer, raise your hand. Leila Boumehdi?
Yes, sir. The verb place requires 3 arguments, and here we have 4 arguments.
What are they? What is the problem exactly?
The flute, the violin.
What are they? What are the thematic relations they've got?
To theme.
Very good. Yes. So the problem here is that the verb place incorrectly has two themes. Okay, the flute is a theme, the violin is a theme. Okay. So this is the problem here. The verb place has got two themes, while the verb place must have only one theme. If we add and, then it's correct. If we say John plays the flute and the violin on the table, then it's correct. Why? Because the flute and the violin becomes one theme if you add and. Okay? So if the rock plays the sky with the fork, can anyone explain why? I mean, this sentence isn't grammatical. Please raise your hand. Say,
Yes, Professor. The problem here is when it comes to the meaning. The rock cannot like place the sky with the fork.
Okay, this is the first problem. The verb place, but you should say it elegantly, which means do not simply say the problem in meaning. So you should say that there is some kind of semantic selection restriction, okay? The verb place requires an agent, and the rock here can't be an agent, okay? The rock placed. You got the point? The rock, so the place, and this is something very interesting. You should say that place has the same number of arguments that it requires. It requires 3 arguments. We have 3 arguments. We have the rock, the sky, with the fork. Okay? The subject is a DP, and it requires the subject to be a DP, such as John. The theme is a DP, and it requires the DP, as we have the flute. With the fork, it requires the location to be a preposition phrase, and with the fork is a prepositional phrase. So this is the first problem. The agent, that the rock is not an agent. What else, please? Yes, please, Ismail?
So with the fork, here is the problem because we need the location, not an agent.
Not
An adjunct.
Not and. Can we replace this with a thematic relation, Leila? For Mahdi. Which is the problem with the fork? Let's say somebody else. Amin Al-Wafi?
Professor, with the fork is a PP.
No, Safa, bring
Is an instrument. With the fork
very
is an
good.
instrument.
Yes, this is the point. The verb place requires a goal or a location, such as on the table. Does not require an instrument. With the fork is an instrument. The verb place does not require an instrument. Okay. This is the problem. And place the sky. Okay, so now the last example, John plays the flute the table. What's the problem here? Please raise your hand.
Can I, sir?
Raise your hand. Okay. Raise your hand. Mr. Yasir.
It lacks the preposition on. Without it, it is a DP, not a PP.
Mr. Yasir, do not answer in this way. Okay. In the exam, do not simply say it lacks a preposition. I need to find, or I need you to use the terminology we have been using, okay? Use the thematic relations, the number of arguments, etc. Do not simply say it requires this and not this, okay? You have to use some terminology. Hayat Khaida.
Yes,
Yes, please. Hayat Khaida. What's the problem here? Hayat Khaida? No answer. Salma, speaking.
Yes, Professor. Here we have 2 themes. We need the goal or the location.
Yes, the problem here is that we have 2 themes, which is incorrect. We need only one theme, and also goal or location, okay, must be there. Okay, so the problem is that there are two themes. We don't need two themes, we need one theme and one goal. Okay, that's having either.
Sir,
Yeah. Yes.
can we start by the verb placed requires 3 arguments? We have 3 arguments, but the problem here in the nature of the last argument, and then said there are 2 themes, and we must have a PP here, location.
Okay, yes, yeah, it's possible, yeah. We must have a location that should be a preposition phrase, okay, not two. So the problem here, as you can see, sometimes we have too many arguments than a verb requires. Sometimes we have too few arguments, okay? For example, look at the example D. John plays the flute. We have fewer arguments than the verb requires. The verb requires 3 and we have only 2. And look at example E. The verb requires only 3 arguments and we have 4 arguments. So this is the conclusion. Okay, so pay attention. You shouldn't have too many arguments than a verb requires, and you shouldn't have too few arguments, okay, than a verb requires. Okay, so you should have exactly the same number and type of arguments that a verb requires with the correct thematic relations. So the verb place requires 3 arguments: agent, DP, the theme, which is DP, and the goal, which must be a preposition phrase. So you must know this about all verbs, all English verbs. Okay, with all English verbs, you must know whether the verb requires an agent, or it requires a theme, or a goal, or an instrument, whatever. So we represent this formally in terms of what is called the theta grid. Now, this information, it requires 3 arguments, etc. We need to use it in some kind of a table, okay, a format. This is called theta grid. Okay, instead of, as you know, linguistics prefers, okay, free redundancy. Okay, free redundant. You'll see this in phonology, free redundant features. So, which means that it gives priority to using features, diagrams, etc., instead of writing long paragraphs and text, etc. If you can represent what you can write in a paragraph or a long paragraph, if you can represent it in a table or in a diagram, it's better in linguistics. This is what we are going to do, okay, to represent this information, saying that the verb, for example, place requires 3 arguments. The first one must be an agent, the second one must be a theme, the third one must be a goal, and it must be a preposition phrase, etc. This information, we are going to encode it in what is called theta grid. Okay, theta grid. Okay, look at this example. This is called theta grid. Okay, this table is called, or diagram is called, theta grid. Okay, so these thematic relations, source, agent, theme, and goal, are called thematic relations. Okay, so B here refers to the thematic relations. B refers to the thematic relations: source, agent, theme, goal, etc. And C refers to the arguments. Okay, A refers to the verb that we are talking about. The verb is place. Okay, D, this is the subject. And please remember, the subject is always underlined. Is underlined. This is the subject. Underlined because it's an external, as we will say, it's external. Okay, and the theme and the goal, or the object and what comes after, are internal. We'll see why. Source, agent, E, theme, and goal. Okay, so here, let's explain this. The verb place requires 3 arguments. Okay, requires a subject argument, which must be a DP, and it could be a source, it could be an agent. Okay, when we say John placed, etc. So John is the agent, the one who is the placer, somebody who placed something, and it's also the source. Okay, it must be a DP. It must be a DP. Okay. And the verb place requires an object, which is the theme. He placed, for example, the book. and the theme must be a DP. We cannot say John placed about it or on it or placed yesterday, etc. It must be a DP, the theme. And the goal must be a preposition phrase. So we say, for example, John placed. By the way, we don't write the verb here in this table, in this data grid. We don't write the verb. The verb we write is here, and in the table we write the number of the argument and the thematic relations required by this verb. Okay? The goal is a preposition phrase. The goal must be a preposition phrase. And here, these are the arguments. We give them, okay, indices. We give it, we follow this order. We start with I, then J, then K. So I will give it to the first argument, and J to the second, and K to the third. Okay? So I repeat. It's very easy, okay? So the verb place, okay? You don't need to write B, C, D, E, A, etc. This is just to help you remember them. This is just to help you that B refers to the thematic relation, C refers to the number of the arguments, D the internal theta role. We'll talk about that. But we need to remember only what is inside the table. Okay, these are the thematic relations required by the verb place. Okay. For example, for the verb give, we need here DP, I, which could be the sponsor agent, and here we need theme, which is I gave the book to John. And the same thing, okay? It could be goal or recipient. Here we should add or recipient. Okay? I, J, and K. If it's not clear, then we can work on other examples. Okay? So for example, the verb smile, for example. The verb smile requires how many arguments, please? The verb
Only one
smile.
argument.
Only
One
one,
argument.
okay? Only one argument, okay? Sorry. Only one argument, which is, what is this argument?
The agent. The agent.
It requires the agent, and the agent must be a DP. Okay, it must be a DP. And we underline it to indicate that this DP must be the subject. It means that we are talking about the subject. We're not talking about the object. Okay. So this verb smile requires agent. We underline it. It means that it is the subject, and this agent must be a DP. Okay. So this is what the verb smile requires. The agent DP. That's all. Okay. Let's talk about the verb, for example, call. The verb call. How many arguments are required by this verb? Thematic relation. Yes, please.
2 arguments.
Two arguments.
It requires only 2 arguments. He called me. So he called me yesterday, etc. So yesterday is simply an adjunct. Okay. So it requires he called me. So he is the agent. Okay. Agent, or we can say
The source.
The source.
Very good. Or we can say the source. The source. He called it, and it must be a DP. It must be a DP, and we underline it because it's the subject. So this is I. He called me. So I am the person. So I am the receiver of the action. So it is what?
Recipient.
Recipient use it only with the verb give and receive. So we say goal. Okay. The goal. He called me. It's a goal. Okay, and it must be a DP as well. It must be a DP, and we give it the letter, the index J. Is it clear now?
Yes, Professor.
Yes.
So in the exam, instead of saying, well, the verb call requires 2 arguments, the first one must be an agent, etc. So you are going to draw this data grid. Please remember this. Remember how to draw this data grid. This is what you're supposed to do in the exam. You're not supposed to write a paragraph saying, well, this is that, okay, the verb call requires 2 arguments, it requires a subject. You can say this, but you have to draw this data grid. Okay? You have to decode this information, okay, into this data grid. Okay, so applying our grid to the previous sentence, we get the following index sentence. So John placed the food on the table. So John gets one argument, I. This C refers to the number of the arguments. the flute is the second argument, and on the table is the third argument. Okay, so we have three arguments. John. So this argument I has the source or agent. The flute argument J has the thematic relation or the theta role theme. On the table has the theta role goal. Fine. I said the subject is underlined. This subject is underlined. First, it helps us understand that this source agent is the subject, and the others are not subject. They come after the verb. Also, so this is the reason why it's underlined, because it's external. External theta role. It's external because the verb and what comes after the verb, which means the theme and the goal or whatever, are grouped together. Okay, under what is called internal theta role. Okay, so the subject is referred to as external theta role, and the object as the internal theta role. The object and what comes after the object. Okay, we'll see that this is very useful. Okay, we'll explain this in a movement. It's like sometimes you need to move only within the internal. Okay, this has a meaning. Okay, when we say the subject is external, it has a meaning. For example, in phonology, can anyone explain why the peak or the nucleus is grouped with the coda and the onset is not grouped with them? It's a branching line. Okay, so let me help you since we're not talking about it's somehow similar to that. So in phonology, for example, the peak, the nucleus, and the coda are grouped together under the rhyme because they contribute to the weight of the syllable, whether it's heavy or light, etc. And the onset never contributes to the weight of the syllable. Okay, so something similar to this in syntax. So the subject. Please, please use your mic. So here we'll talk about this. The subject is external, okay, and the object and what comes after internal. Okay, why? We'll see something similar to phonology. Not exactly, but they behave together, as we'll see. Now, external theta role assigned to the subject, and internal theta role assigned to the direct and indirect objects. Let me give you just a hint. We find the direct object and indirect object behave together, but you can never find the subject and the object behave together. Okay, for example, the direct and indirect, you can use and between them, you can use and, you can use conjunction between them, etc. But you can never use conjunction between the subject and the verb or the object. Okay, so this is just a very simple example to explain that indirect and direct object, and syntactically they are branched together, but the subject and the object can never branch together. That's why it's external. Remember this piece of information, please. Okay, so adjuncts, Mr. Yasir, adjuncts are not listed in the data grid. Adjuncts seem to be entirely optional. For example, John put the book on the table with a pair of tongs. Of course, with a pair of tongs is an instrument, but please do not say this, because the verb book requires only three arguments. Requires the subject John, and the book the theme, and on the table. That's enough. You don't need to talk about extra information. You don't need to talk about with a pair of tongs, it's an instrument, etc. Do not talk about all the words that you have in a sentence. Don't say, for example, John is the subject. It's one argument, and it's the agent. The book is the second argument, and it's the theme. On the table, this prepositional phrase is the third argument that is required by the verb, and it's a goal or place or location, the place, or simply say the location. With a pair of tongs is an instrument, but with a pair of tongs, this instrument is not obligatorily required by the verb. So please forget about adjuncts. The same thing here. In the classroom, John put the book on the table. Pay attention. We know that the verb put requires only three arguments. These are the three arguments, John, the book on the table. We don't need okay, the extra information. Is it clear, Mr. Yasir? And all of you, of course.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, so remember that we are doing this in order to stop exploit rules from over-generating sentences that are ungrammatical. Therefore, we need a constraint that disallows exploit theory from generalizing in grammatical sentences due to the number of verb arguments, for example. So the main point we are discussing today is that exploit theory is able to generate sentences where the verb has more arguments than it requires. We need to stop this. Okay, so this constraint is called the Theta Criterion. So we have Theta grid, simply refers to that table, okay, that diagram. This is that is called Theta grid. And thematic relations, okay, refer to agent, goal, instrument, location, etc. This is thematic relations. And these thematic relations are referred to as theta roles. For example, if the subject is an agent and the source at the same time. So both of them are called theta role. There is only one theta role, and you have two thematic relations. And there is a constraint called Theta Criterion. This is a constraint. We need to block, okay, exploit theory from over generalizing or generating sentences. So the Theta Criterion ensures that there is a strict match between the number and types of arguments in a sentence and the Theta grid. So what is the function of this Theta Criterion? For example, if the verb requires 3 arguments, the Theta Criterion says you must have only 3 arguments. If you have 2 or more than 3 arguments, Theta Criterion will rule out this sentence. So what is the job, what is the function of this constraint, which is Theta Criterion? It ensures that the verb takes only the number of the arguments required, only required number of the arguments. Okay? So I repeat, the Theta Criterion ensures that there is a strict match between the number and type of argument in a sentence and the Theta grid, which means, to put it in simple terms, Theta Criterion ensures that if the verb requires 1 argument, there must be only 1 argument. If it requires 2 arguments, there must be only 2 arguments. If it requires 3, there must be only 3. This is the function of this constraint. Okay, Theta Criterion. Is it clear, please? Because Theta Criterion is a very interesting concept in this chapter. It's one of the most important concepts we have covered so far. Theta Criterion. So the Theta Criterion contains 2 categories or 2 parts. It states that each argument is assigned 1 and only 1 theta role, and each theta role is assigned to 1 and only 1 argument. So it seems the same thing, but it's not. It's not. So each argument is assigned 1 and only 1 theta role. Each theta role is assigned to 1 and only 1 argument. We need examples to explain it easily. Don't worry. We move to the examples and come back to this constraint. So it means that you can't have more arguments than you have theta rows. And you can't have more theta rows than you have arguments. When we talk about arguments, we talk about DPs. Okay? And the arguments will have to be of appropriate semantic type. Don't say, for example, the comb hates or the rock killed, etc. There must be appropriate semantic types for the sentence to pass the constraint. Now consider the verb love. Love, then we'll explain the term, this constraint. So remember, there is no E here, theta grid of the verb love. Okay, so the verb love requires 2 arguments, as you know. The verb requires somebody who loves and something which is loved. Okay, so this is by definition the verb love. I'm not talking about that human property such as humans love. It could be intransitive when you say humans love, which means they have the ability to love. I'm not talking about this meaning, this sense. Okay, I'm talking about the case of transitive. So the verb love requires 2 arguments. Somebody who loves and somebody or something which is loved. So somebody who loves experiences something. So it's the experiencer. So we underline it because it's the subject. It must be a DP. And the theme, somebody or something that is loved. It must be a DP. Okay? So this is the theta grid for the verb love. It requires two arguments, experiencer and theme. Both of them are DPs. Fine. Here is an example. Megan loves Kevin. So this sentence is grammatical because the verb love has two arguments. Megan is the experiencer and Kevin is the theme. Fine. This sentence is grammatical because the verb requires two arguments and we have two arguments. Okay? Megan is I. I, we find it here with the experiencer, is the experiencer, and Kevin is J, is the theme. Okay? You see now? In the exam, if I give you a sentence like this, so you have to draw the theta grid similar to this one. Megan loves Kevin. Okay, so I, the experiencer, which is Megan, and J is Kevin, which is the theme. So the sentence is correct. So note that the indices of each of the arguments match theta rows in the grid. Now we are explaining the constraint, which is theta criterion, which requires that there must be a match between theta rows and the arguments. Theta rows are the thematic relations. Theta rows are experiencer, theme, agent, etc. So here we have two theta rows, the experiencer and the theme. And here we have two arguments. We have argument I and we have J. So fine. Now we satisfy that constraint, which says that okay, each argument is assigned one and one theta row. Each theta row is assigned to one and only one argument. Now let me explain it again. So here each argument we have I is assigned one theta row, which is experiencer, and J is another argument and it's assigned one theta row. So we can say that each argument, it's I or J, each argument here is assigned one theta row. And if we start with the theta rows, we say each theta row, which is experiencer or theme, each theta row is assigned one argument. So whether you start with the arguments from the bottom, you start with I and J, and you say we have two arguments, I and J, and they are assigned two theta rows, experiencer and theme. Or you can start from the top. You can say the experiences and theme are called theta rows. Two theta rows are assigned two arguments. And this is the meaning of the constraint. Okay, you can start with the bottom. Okay, the bottom I and J, and you say each argument is assigned one and only one theta row. Theta rows refer to experiencer, theme, etc. So in the previous example with the verb love, we have I and J. I is assigned experiencer theta row, and J is assigned theme theta row. Or you can start from the bottom. You can say each theta row is assigned to one and one argument, which means the first theta row, which is experiencer, is assigned I. And the second theta row, which is theme, is assigned the index J. Is it clear now? Is the constraint theta criterion clear? I think I'm seriously thinking of it to be one of the questions in the exam. Theta criterion. Is it clear? Yes or no?
Yes,
Yes, clear.
Yes, Professor.
Okay, so thus the sentence is grammatical with the correct number of arguments and the correct number of theta rows. There is a one-to-one matching. Please remember this sentence. You have to write it in the exam. You have to say that the sentence is grammatical with the correct number of arguments, and there is one-to-one matching between arguments and theta rows. Okay? So the theta criterion is satisfied, and the sentence is allowed to pass through the filter and surface. Okay? Now contrast this with the ungrammatical sentence. How would you explain its ungrammaticality? Megan loves. Please, I'm going to show you how to answer if you have it in the exam. The first thing you should do, draw what? Theta grid. The theta grid, okay? This is the first thing you should do. Of course, we know that the verb love requires two arguments. Somebody who loves and somebody or something that is loved. So Megan loves John. So what is missing here is the theme. Fine. It lacks the theme argument. You see, this is how you should answer in the exam. Please pay attention. So the verb love, we write the theta rows that are required by the verb. The verb love requires experiencer, which is the subject, is underlined. You have to underline it in the exam. Don't forget this. So it requires the subject, which must be an experiencer, and it must be a DP, and it requires somebody that is loved or something that is loved. So it's the theme, and it must be a DP. So this is the first thing we start with. So we know that the verb love requires experiencer and theme. Fine. But what do we have in this sentence, Megan loves? We have only the experiencer. There is no theme in this sentence. Megan loves. Megan loves. There is no theme. There is only the experiencer. So we write down the experiencer, the index for the experiencer. It's I argument. So what are we missing here? We are missing
second argument.
The argument for the theme. Okay, the argument. We're not missing the theta row. We are missing the correspondent of the theme, which is the argument. So the theme, okay, the theta row is not assigned to an argument. We have the theme, but it has no argument. There is no index in its lower box. There is no J here because we don't have it here. Okay, we write theme because it is required by the verb love. But here we write the indexes that we have in the sentence. In the sentence, we have only the experiences. We write I. We don't have the theme. We don't write it. So we say that the problem here is that the theme, theta row, this theta row is not assigned to an argument. So what does it violate again? It violates the Theta Criterion. Which one, A or B? A, each argument is assigned one and only one theta row, and B, each theta row is assigned to one and only one argument. Which one is violated? A or B?
B.
Yes, thank you, B. Because we have the theta row, which is theme, and it's not assigned to one argument. Okay? So please give me some time just to plug the charger. Okay, so sorry. So I said it's the second part of the definition that is violated because we have a theta row, which is the theme, and it's not assigned an argument. Okay, so look again at the example. Okay. You see, so we have the theme that is required by the verb, but we don't have it in the sentence Megan loves. So we have the theta row theme, and it's not assigned an argument. So please pay attention in the exam. You have to say which part of the definition of this principle is violated. Is it A or B? Okay, right. So this violates the second condition of the Theta Criterion. Okay, each theta row is assigned to one and only one argument. Now let's see an example where A is violated. A is violated. Okay. So although X-bar rules can generate this sentence, which is Megan loves, it's ruled out by the Theta Criterion, as there isn't a one-to-one matching of the theta rows, okay, to the argument. So this sentence, unfortunately, which is Megan loves, is generated by X-bar theory. But yeah.
Sorry, but sometimes I can't hear you clearly.
The others, do you hear me? Fine?
No, yes, it's here, but sometimes Professor he goes like it's not heard.
Okay. Let me repeat. I said here, we have the theme, but the theme has no argument. So there is violation of the second condition of the Theta criterion. Okay, because we have a theta role which is theme, and it's not assigned to an argument. So unfortunately, this sentence, which is Megan loves, is generated by X-bar theory. But what we are doing, we're trying to constrain X-bar theory by certain constraints. One of them is the Theta criterion. So what the Theta criterion does is to limit the over-generalizing or generating of X-bar theory. Okay. Now let's see the violation of the second condition of the Theta criterion or condition. Now an example that violates the first requirement of the Theta criterion. Megan loves Jason given. Which means I'm helping you, okay? If you have fewer arguments than required by the verb, then there is violation of the second condition. If, for example, the verb requires 2 arguments and there is only 1, it means that there is a theta role that is not assigned to 1 argument. Okay, so to remember this easily is to focus on this explanation. If you have fewer than the required arguments, for example, the verb love requires 2 arguments and you have only 1, this is violation of the second condition of the criterion. If the verb love requires 2, but you have 3 arguments in the sentence, it means there is violation of condition A. Okay, so look at this example. Megan loves Jason Kevin. We know that the verb love requires only 2 arguments. Okay, but here we have 3. We have Megan, which is the experiencer, and we have 2 themes. We have 2 themes, Jason, Kevin. So this is violation of the first condition. We have an extra argument. Okay, so we know that the verb love requires only experiencer and theme. So why do we have this K here, which is for Kevin? We shouldn't have it, which means we have an extra argument here that is not assigned to any theta role at the top of it. You see, so this is the opposite of this one. Here we have a theme, we have a theta role that is not assigned to an argument. Because the verb obligatory requires experiencer and theme. Unfortunately, in the sentence given here, we have only experiencer. So, okay? But here it's the opposite. We have an extra argument. Okay? So the argument given doesn't get a theta role. The verb can't give it, okay? Can't require it. Therefore, we can constrain the output of the X-bar rules using a semantic tool, theta roles and theta criterion constraints. Is it clear now? Please, these 2 cases, I'm saying 90% will be in the exam. You'll have a case where there are extra arguments, as in this case, and this is violation of the first condition of the theta criterion constraint. Or you may have the violation of the second. This is a violation of the first condition. There is this is what you should say. There is an extra argument, K, which is not assigned a theta role. This is the violation of the first condition, which states that each argument must be assigned to 1 and only 1 theta role. There is no theta role here. Okay, and the same thing here, you should say this is also a violation of theta criterion because we have a theta role, which is theme, and it's not assigned to an argument. So please remember, theta roles refer to experiencer, theme, agent, location, etc. And arguments, the indexes, these indexes that we have here refer to these arguments. Is there any question, please? Is there any question? Yes, please. Any question?
No.
So please be patient. We still have just 3 slides and we stop and we finish the chapter. Just 3 slides, okay? The lexicon. Okay, so where the lexicon is about where these rules and these theta roles are stored in the mind. Now we move on, and it's like we move to what is underlying, or we discuss the definition, think how these rules are stored in the mind. Okay, so we link this to the mind, okay, the lexicon. So where these rules, X-bar rules, and these theta roles, theme, agent, experiencer, etc., are stored in the mind. Where exactly? So Chomsky proposes that the part of the mind devoted to language is essentially divided into two parts. Okay, into two parts. One part is called computational component. Please remember this part, because you will see it again in the master of linguistics in syntax. You will talk about this in more detail. Computational component. This computational component contains all the rules and constraints. So one part in our mind, one part of our mind, linguists call it computational component. Why computational? Because it's the one that tries to combine rules together, etc. It contains all the rules and constraints. Okay? This part builds sentences together and filters out any ill-formed ones. Any sentence which is ungrammatical is filtered out, is ruled out. This is the function of computational component. The computational component cannot work in a vacuum alone. It needs access to information about theta roles and the like. So this computational component, which tries to combine sentences together and to rule out ill-formed, and it's responsible for rules and constraints, etc., it cannot work alone. It must get access to information about theta roles. We're talking about the syntax. So Chomsky claims that this information, theta roles, is stored in the lexicon, the second part of the human language faculty. Now you see now, there are two parts. I think you talked about this in psycholinguistics last semester. So we have two parts in our mind, okay? So the first one, the lexicon, okay? The lexicon is the part of the mind where you find information about words, etc. And the rules and how you combine words together, you find it in the computational component. Okay? So the lexicon is your mental dictionary or list of words and their properties. So the lexicon is your mental dictionary. We all have mental dictionaries. The nature and the number of the vocabulary that you know can never be similar to the number and nature of vocabulary that somebody else knows. It's impossible, because we read different books, we listen to different and watch different videos, different channels, etc. So we have different desires, etc. So we can never have exactly the same number and nature of the words that we have stored in our mind. Everyone has a unique mental dictionary, and this is called the lexicon. So the lexicon is the mental dictionary or list of words, and their properties means when you store the word in your mind, you store it with its syntactic category, whether it's a noun, a verb, an adjective, etc. The properties. Okay? The computational component is something else. It contains the rules, not simply the words, the rules and constraints. Okay? So the information about the arguments each verb takes is stored in the lexicon. Yes. So the lexicon contains the words and their syntactic category, whether it's a noun, a preposition, etc. And also the verbs that are stored in the mind, they are stored with the number of the arguments they require. For example, the verb love requires 2 arguments. The verb give requires 3 arguments. So this information, we have it in the lexicon, not in the computational component. Okay? So the lexicon contains all the irregular and memorized parts of language. Those irregular rules, for example, people are, we say people are, or we say that the past of read is read, the same spelling. This is irregular, it's stored in the lexicon. Why in the lexicon and not in the computational component? Because it must be memorized, so it is in the lexicon. But if you can use rules, constraints, etc., to filter things, then we are talking about computational component. So each lexical entry, which means any word or dictionary entry, must contain at least the following information. So when we store a word in our lexicon, we store it with the following information: the meaning of it, and the syntactic category, whether it's a noun, verb, etc., and the pronunciation of the word, and exceptional information of all kinds. Exceptional, if it's irregular, you must learn it by heart. When we say you must learn it by heart, it means store it in your lexicon, not in the computational component, because computational component is responsible for rules, consistent rules. The theta grid, argument structure, which means how many arguments the verb requires, is also stored in the lexicon. Is it clear? So in the lexicon, we find the mental dictionary, the words, their meaning, their pronunciation, their syntactic categories, etc. But if you want to link them together to produce grammatically correct sentences, then we're not talking about the lexicon, we're talking about computational components. Please, these are very interesting components that Chomsky talks about. Computational component and the lexicon. Lexicon is responsible for the words, etc., their pronunciation, their meaning, the syntactic category, etc. Computational component is responsible for...
Professor?
Yes?
In the lexicon, there is no structure through which we regulate sentences. We just store them without any structure.
Yes, it's like we store them independently, okay? They're not combined together. They're combined by computational components. So the way how the grammatical system works is shown in this diagram. So this is, I think, the last slide. This is how, no, it's not the last, unfortunately. Sorry. This is how it works. The lexicon. We have the words here, the meaning, the pronunciation, and theta grids, the arguments required by a verb. Then the computational component takes those words and works out certain rules. For example, because we're working on syntax, so X-bar rules. If you're talking about phonology, then you have phonological rules here, morphological rules, etc. So in this case, we're talking about X-bar theory, so X-bar rules. So the computational component takes the words, or we can say the lexicon gives those words to the computational component. The computational component takes them and uses X-bar rules to see whether they are to combine words together. And then the Theta criterion, once X-bar rules combine words together, then they're assigned to Theta criterion. The Theta criterion requires that if there is no one-to-one matching between the number of the arguments and theta roles, then it is ruled out. If we say, for example, Megan loves, full stop, so we have Megan in the lexicon, and we have love as a verb in the lexicon. Then we move to the computation component. We apply X-bar rules. Megan loves, unfortunately, is generated by X-bar rules, but when it moves to theta criterion, it is ruled out. It is ruled out by theta criterion, and then we get the output. It doesn't, Megan loves does not move to the output. So the output is out of this square because the output is in the surface structure. Here we're talking about the mind, the lexicon and the computation component. We have them in our mind. The output is in the surface structure. Okay, so the lexicon feeds into the computation component, which then combines words and generates sentences. The lexicon contains words, okay, nouns, adjectives, etc., information about verbs, how many arguments are required, etc. Then it feeds, okay, into the computation. It provides this information. It provides the computation component with this information. The computation component takes this information and tries to link words together, following, for example, X-bar rules. But then when we move to theta criterion, the theta criterion rules out any sentence where there is no correspondence between the theta roles and the arguments. So the fact that lexical information affects the form of the sentence is formalized in what we call the projection principle. Projection principle means that lexical information is always there, such as theta row is syntactically represented at all levels, at the lexicon, computational component, etc. Lexical information is always represented, okay, at all levels. But the projection principle is not of great importance, but the extent of projection principle is what concerns us. Okay, I don't know whether we should like proceed or stop here. Okay, so I'm sorry to take you for 10 minutes. Okay, we need to finish this. Expletives and extended projection principle. The last section. So expletives and the extended projection principle, the special case of weather verbs, such as it snows, it rains, hails, etc. They are called weather verbs. Okay, so these predicates don't seem to assign any theta roles. For example, the verb snow. Okay, it does not require any theta. It does not require a subject. It does not require a subject as an agent or a source or whatever, and it does not require an object. Okay, so what theta role does, the pronoun it gets in the following sentences. So you see, these are very interesting examples. It rained, it snowed, it hailed. So the weather verbs rain, snow, hail. Okay, so they have a subject which is it. But what is the theta role of the subject it? It is not an agent, is not a source, it's nothing. It's nothing. Okay, so this is problematic. So it appears as if it does not refer to anything when we say it rained, it snowed. What does it refer to? It refers to nothing. Okay, so you may say if it refers to nothing, why do we have it? We have it because there must be a subject. Okay, so in syntax we refer to pronouns like this as expletives or pleonastic pronouns. Okay, these are called expletives. This is a very interesting term. Whenever you insert it, whenever you have it, you just insert it. It refers to nothing. It has no theta role. It's not a theme. It's not an agent. It's nothing. This is called expletive. Okay, expletive. So these pronouns don't get a theta role, which is a violation of theta criterion. Okay, a violation because you have an argument and it has no theta role. You have a subject, it has no theta role. It violates theta criterion. So the theta grid for weather verbs is empty. They don't assign any theta roles. For example, the verb snow is empty, the theta role, because it does not obligatorily require a subject, an agent, or whatever. It does not require a theme or goal or whatever. So these verbs are exceptional because their theta grid is empty. Okay, it's like we need to say just snow or just rain. Okay, but we'll see why do we say it snows, it rains, etc. So there is another class of predicates that take expletive pronouns. These are predicates that optionally take a CP subject. We have another example of expletive pronouns. For example, that Bill loves chocolate is likely. So this predicate is likely. What does it require? It does not require subjects because that Bill loves chocolate is not the subject of is likely. We can say it is likely that Bill loves chocolate, which means that Bill loves chocolate is the object. It's not the subject. Okay, so the predicate is likely assigns one theta role. It takes one argument, which is the clause. Okay, proposition. Proposition for the time being, it refers to CP. CP, whenever you have CP, it's proposition. So is likely requires one preposition. We say it is likely that, it is likely to do it, it's likely that you deserve it, etc. So is likely must be followed by a complementizer phrase. This is the only thing it requires. It doesn't require a subject that must be an agent, etc. That's it. When we say it is likely that, etc., that's it. Has no theta role. Okay, it's simply inserted. So note that proposition is not underlined because the clause bearing the theta role of proposition is a complement, not a subject. Okay, so that Bill loves chocolate is likely. So that Bill loves chocolates is the object indeed, because we say it is likely that Bill loves chocolate. So the predicate is likely requires a complement, which is a proposition. It does not require a subject, but a subject is imposed by another constraint. So we'll talk about. So normally we say it is likely that Belle takes chocolate. So you either insert it and you say it is likely that Bill likes chocolate, or you don't insert it and you say that Bill loves chocolate is likely. But what is important is to have that CP. That CP is obligatory. But it is not obligatory. You can say that Bill loves chocolate, or you can say is likely, or you can say it's likely that Bill likes chocolate. Okay, so in this sentence, again, we have an expletive with no theta row. What is the expletive? The expletive is it. What does it refer to? When you say it is likely, or when you say it seems, it sounds, what does it refer to? It refers to nothing. So please remember, you are frequently using these sentences, but you don't know the meaning of it. When you say, it sounds fine, it seems okay, it is likely, it snows, it rains. So what does it refer to? For example, it rains. Does it refer to the rain? No, it's impossible. Because we cannot say the rain rains if it refers to the rain. So we should replace it with rain. We should say the rain rains. So it does not refer. Some people might say it refers to the sky rains. Okay, this is kind of culture. Some people say the sky which rains, etc. So this it in these examples, it sounds, it seems, it's likely, etc. It has no theta road. It's not an agent. It's not a goal. It's not a theme. It's nothing. So why is it inserted? It is inserted because of another constraint, which requires that it must be a subject there. So first, this it is called an expletive. An expletive. Okay. So remember that there are two types of it. One that bears a theta role and one that doesn't. Well, this is very easy. I say, for example, it seems, and I like it. So it in I like it is different from it in it seems. It seems it refers to nothing, but I like it. So it is a theme. It refers to something that is liked. You got the point? Different.
Yes.
We have two types of it. Okay. So I love it. So love it is not an expletive. Love it, I love it is not an expletive. It's a theme. I put a book on it. So it is a goal or location. Okay, but when I say it seems, it sounds, etc., so it here is an expletive. So expletives appear where there is no theta marked DP or CP that fills the subject position, which means if there is no subject, this it is inserted. Now we understand why this it is inserted. Is inserted because there must be a subject, and this is called extended projection principle. This is the last point to cover. Please remember this term. It's very interesting. This term and the criterion, okay, Theta Criterion and the extended projection principle are very interesting. Extended projection principle states all clauses must have subjects, okay, and lexical information is expressed at all levels. So at least you must remember the first thing. All clauses must have subjects, okay? All clauses must have subjects. So the EPP, extended projection principle, which requires all subjects to have, all clauses to have subjects, works like the Theta Criterion. It's a constraint on the output of the XBAR rules. Okay? It should be closer to the Theta Criterion because they have the same function. They rule out ungrammatical sentences. So now we satisfied the extended projection principle by the insertion of an expletive it. This is an expletive, inserts an expletive pronoun into the specifier. Which one should be applied first? Extended projection principle or expletive insertion rule? So, for example, with verbs like snow, etc., the expletive insertion rule should apply first. We should insert it. Why? So as not to be ruled out by the extended projection principle. Extended projection principle says you must have a subject. So if you simply say snow, it will be ruled out. So you have to insert it, then you move to the extended projection principle. So the order is very interesting. However, the problem is that this expletive pronoun has no theta row, which means it will be ruled out by theta row, and as such will be blocked by the Theta Criterion, which states that there must each argument is assigned one and only one theta row, etc. So the solution is to solve this problem, we need to order the expletive insertion rule after the application of the Theta Criterion, as in this. So please pay attention. This is the last slide. Okay, it's the last one. Let me explain it. So this is the summary. So here, look at the computational components. I said we have XBAR rules and Theta Criterion. Theta Criterion requires that if you have 2 arguments, you have 2 theta rows. 3 arguments, 3 theta rows. If you have 3 theta rows, you have 3 arguments, etc. So there must be a correspondence between the number of the arguments and the number of the theta rows. If you say, for example, Megan loves, full stop, it will be generated by XBAR rules, but will be ruled out by Theta Criterion. Okay? Fine. If you say just snow, so snow will be ruled out by XBAR theory. And in the theta row will pass, will not be ruled out, because in the Theta Criterion, snow requires no theta grid. It does not obligatorily require an agent or a theme, etc. So it will move down expletive insertion rule. Okay, so snow will be ruled out by EPP, which extend projection principle, which requires that every clause must have a subject. That's why we have to save it. So it's not to be ruled out by EPP. We need to add it. So here we started with snow. It is generated by XBAR rules, and it passes Theta Criterion because snow does not require any theta grid. It does not require a theme or an agent. So it passes Theta Criterion. It's not ruled out by it. Expletive insertion. So if we move to the EPP, snow will be ruled out because there is no subject. That's why. So we have to start with expletive insertion rule first. So we insert it, it becomes it snows, then it passes the EPP, extend the projection principle, then it snows is grammatically correct. So you see now what we have done in this chapter. We have XBAR rules that we talked about. Now what we added the constraints, Theta Criterion, expletive insertion rule, EPP, to restrict XBAR rules. Okay, now let's just take another example. Let me explain this and take one more example. So we said that the lexicon contains the words with their meaning, pronunciation, the number of the arguments as far as verbs are concerned that are required. Okay, this is the lexicon. And lexicon feeds this information into the computational component. The computational component tries to combine these words together following certain rules. Because we're talking about syntax, so we focus on XBAR rules. If we're talking about phonology, we'll focus on other rules. Okay? So these are the 2 parts that we have in our mind, as Chomsky says. Fine. When we start with XBAR rules, we need to constrain, because we have noticed that XBAR rules sometimes generate grammatical sentences. We need to stop this. How can we stop this? We tried in this chapter to constrain over-generating of XBAR rules by adding certain constraints, certain rules. We have Theta Criterion, constraint, expletive insertion rule, and EPP, extended projection principle. Theta Criterion requires that the number of the arguments must match the number of theta rows, and the number of the theta rows must match the number of the arguments. Expletive insertion rule means insert it to avoid the problem of extended projection principle, which requires that every clause must have a subject. Okay? Now, if we take an example, like he called. He called. Please pay attention. You may have it in the exam, so you should know how to answer. So he called. So we have in the lexicon information about he. We know that it's a pronoun, call is a verb. In the lexicon, we know that call requires 2 arguments. Okay, that's fine. Then the lexicon provides this information. Okay, it provides computational component with this information. Then the computational information tries to link he with call, and we get he called. So XBAR rules, this is the problem. Unfortunately, XBAR rules will generate it. He, so we have CP, C bar, TP, etc. The DP, which is the subject, is he, and the VP, V bar, V0 bar, and the call. Fine. There is no problem with XBAR rules. So XBAR rules blindly generate the tree for he called. Now, when we move to the Theta Criterion, then it is blocked. It is blocked because the verb call requires 2 arguments. Requires an agent, somebody who calls, and requires somebody who is called. Okay, he called me. You can call it goal if you want. You can call it the goal. So the goal here. So here we have an argument which is missing. The verb requires a goal and an agent, but it is missing in the sentence. So it is ruled out by Theta Criterion. It will not surface. It will not surface. Okay. So you may have other examples where there is violation of APP. This is the case where, like with with a verb, when you say, for example, rains tomorrow, or rain, or I don't know, it will rain tomorrow. So you may say simply will rain tomorrow. So will rain tomorrow passes the Theta Criterion because the verb rain does not require the Theta grid for the verb rain is empty. It does not require theme, agent, etc. It will be ruled out by APP, but when it moves through the expletive insertion, it will be saved because we will insert it. It will rain tomorrow. Then, okay, it passes the APP and it surfaces. Okay, so this is how you should, judge whether a sentence is correct or not. You have to go through these steps. Please remember these steps because you will study them in the master as well. It's about rules, Theta Criterion, expletive insertion rule, APP, extended projection principle, which requires that every sentence clause must have a subject. Okay, we will modify this in the future. So please remember this and remember the Theta grid. Okay. So if you have them in the exam, you may have the APP, extended projection principle, etc., or criterion, the Theta Criterion, okay, which has two parts, okay. Each argument must be assigned to one and only one theta row, and each theta row must be assigned to one and only one argument. Okay, remember this thematic relations, location, etc. What else? Yes, remember how to answer questions like how would you judge the grammaticality of the following sentences? Remember that adjuncts are not required by in the theta grid because they are optional. Remember the meaning of Theta Criterion, two parts of it. For example, the verb level that we said. So you have to do something like this. So we have two problems. Problem A, as in love here, when you have a theta row and it has no argument. The verb love, for example, requires two theta rows and two arguments, but we only have in the sentence we have no argument for theme. The second problem when you have extra arguments. So this is what you should remember. The two parts again: computation component and lexicon, and how they work. Okay.
Professor,
Yeah, please.
can we say that competence and performance, like Chomsky dichotomies, are related to lexicon and computational component?
Professor, we can't hear you.
I don't hear anything.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yes. So I answered you. Maybe you're not hearing. Okay. So I said the competence and performance are not the same because the performance is something in the surface structure. Okay. And the competence, yes, competence, lexicon, computation components are about the competence. Those rules that we stored in our mind. Okay, Chomsky says that competence is that innate, okay, knowledge that we have about language rules, etc. But performance is something individual. It's something in the surface structure. So it's not here. Okay, it's something like in the surface structure. We can replace these syntactic rules with phonological rules. For example, we have devoicing, voicing, spermatization. Okay, those phonological rules that you have discussed. Okay, deletion, insertion, voicing, devoicing, spermatization, metathesis, etc. Okay, coalescence, vowel harmony, etc. So they are the same. So we can replace all the syntactic rules with those phonological rules that we put here. We put them in a certain order depending on the structure we are talking about. Because we're talking about syntax, we have Theta Criterion, expletive insertion rule, APP. If we're talking about phonology, then maybe here we talk about OCP, obligatory contour principle. Maybe we talk about sonority principle, devoicing, etc. And we justify their order. Then we move to the surface structure, okay? Which means that moving from the computational component to the surface structure, we have a number of transformational rules. Transformation rules. It's like moving from the deep structure to the surface structure. We have a number of transformational rules. Okay? Any question, or we stop here?
Professor, one more question, please. For example, sometimes adjuncts may add some meaning to the verb. For example, John drinks every night. We can understand like the verb drink. Like we should have two arguments, but here every night can add the meaning that he drinks wine, not something like juice or water.
So you should say this in semantics, not in syntax. We're not talking about meaning. Yes, in semantics, it drinks wine or whatever yesterday, every day, etc., or tomorrow. It adds some kind of meaning, but this is in semantics, not in syntax. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Because in semantics, so more focus on the meaning of words. If you may simply say, well, he drink instead of drinks. He drink cola tomorrow morning, etc. So all these content words contribute to the meaning. So which means that they have arguments, but the arguments, the meaning of the arguments in semantics is different from the meaning of arguments in syntax. Okay. So to cut it short, in syntax, we pay attention only to the necessary arguments. Okay? Only the arguments required by the verb. Forget about adjuncts. So I'm sorry for taking you too long. So I'm going to share this session with you. Okay, just because I know that. Well, it's actually your problem, but it doesn't matter. Some students, well, we have just about 70 students who attended the session. Normally, you are more than 200. Well, this gives an idea, which means that, I don't know, from more than 1,000 students, only 80 students attend. So you shouldn't, well, maybe be shocked if you find only 50, only 60 students who have passed this module, because you can see it now. No more than 70 students who regularly attend. So especially in syntax, how can you understand subjects like syntax, phonology, semantics, morphology, etc. if you don't regularly attend? It's very hard, very hard. I think I have to call it a day and see you next. By the way, starting from next week, I'm going to group all the groups together on Monday. Are you free on on Tuesday? Are you free at 10 o'clock? All the groups. If you're not free, then we can have a
Yes,
session.
Professor. On Tuesday,
Yes,
on
Professor.
Tuesday at 10 o'clock, we are free.
All the groups free? All the groups at 10 o'clock. I will have a look at your timetable again. And on Friday, are you all free on Friday at 10? On Friday.
Yes, Professor. Friday.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
No, sir.
Who said no?
Me, Professor.
So what do you have? Which session?
We have a session with Professor Bajawi.
Is it every Friday?
No, the coming Friday, I think. Just the coming Friday.
Okay. And Saturday?
No, it's free.
Saturday is free.
We are free. Yeah, we are free.
Okay, so we are going to proceed as follows. So starting from next week, every Tuesday and Saturday at 10 o'clock, I will have all the groups together. Okay, so we'll have 2 sessions a week. We need to finish the program because we still have only 2 weeks. Only 2 weeks at the maximum. So we have to finish the program. Don't think of the exam for the time being, because if you want, we can exclude certain chapters from the exam, but what is important is to understand the whole program first. Okay, so starting from next week, I'll see you on Tuesday at 10 o'clock and Saturday at 10 o'clock. So please, I don't need to remind you every time. So you're informed. Tuesday, Saturday at 10 o'clock, all the groups.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, sir.